We're finally in an era that we can, that consumers can actually be mindful of how their data is used. Welcome back to Mad Culture with your hosts, Bryan Rios and Joshua Grant. Joshua, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good.
We have a guest today, which is also quite cool. I think it's the first guest we've had on the podcast. So I'd like to introduce Josh Wilson, who's the commercial director of Crimtan. Crimtan is a programmatic platform. And so we invited Josh to join us today to talk a little bit about the subject we're going to discuss today. So I'll let Josh introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks guys. No, it's really good to be here, and thanks for inviting me on the show. Yeah, as Joshua said, Crimtan, we're a programmatic platform. We specialize in lifecycle marketing. We're a UK company, so we founded, I think, in 2009. And we've been through quite a lot in terms of data privacy and regulations around GDPR and things like that. So yeah.
How long have you been doing business in APAC, or Japan specifically?
So I joined Crimtan about 2015. It was soon after when I started to travel from Australia, where I'm originally from Sydney. I think my first kind of business trip to Japan was 2017. Completely different market to what I was used to in Australia.
Sure, yeah.
Had a lot of challenges. And then a couple of years later, 2019, I moved to Japan and built out our office here.
Nice. Very cool.
Amazing. Cool, yeah, and so the reason that we asked Josh to come on the podcast today is that we're going to be talking about privacy and data and protections that you should be aware of, things that, maybe hopefully answering some questions that you have around this topic. And so we're going to be going over three main issues. The first one is, what is the current privacy situation?
Yeah.
What data is being collected, why, potentially what that's being used for. The second is what are we talking about when we say data? Like, what does that actually mean? Again, what's being collected? Where is that going? And then the final topic is going to be, should you opt in? Like, as a consumer, what's the value proposition? What are you really getting from advertising and data collection?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I want to point out that this particular episode is not just for marketers. We really thought about sort of making this for everyone to sort of really understand all of the things that are happening around data. Obviously, data and privacy has been a big topic, even so recently with things like vaccine passports and all of that, and sort of what is acceptable for not only big corporations but the government, et cetera, to collect a view. And so I think what we wanted to do here was just essentially kind of lay out for people who aren't in our business the pros and cons of data collection and what that actually really means. I'm sure probably you've both seen, I think probably the biggest sort of conversation starter around this in sort of recent months has been the Apple change to iOS 14, which obviously sent the advertising world into a frenzy. But they also released a direct-to-consumer commercial. And I don't know if you both saw it. Did you both see it?
Yes. Yeah.
But it's quite a good commercial. So since we can't show it, I'll explain it. But it's basically a guy who's essentially being followed around by one person, and then that sort of grows exponentially to sort of hundreds of people, sort of just following him around, checking everything that he does, writing things down, and then ultimately in the end, he receives a prompt from iOS saying, do you want to be tracked, basically? And he says no, and then all of these people disappear. So I guess my question to Josh and both of you is why do you think that this is such an important issue now, and why do you think companies like Apple and Google are all of a sudden sort of raising questions around privacy and data? Do you think it's being driven by the consumer? Do you think it's just being driven by regulation? Where do you think it all kind of started and came from?
I think it's probably important, firstly, to kind of point out why Apple did that, and they went all in on it. I think, if you look at Apple's business model, it's never really been about advertising at all. They don't make any money from advertising. And then on the other side of it, Google, who's the other tech giant that you've introduced, all of their majority of their revenue comes from advertising. So you would never see kind of Google coming out and doing that. So I think that's kind of an important consideration. I think what you mentioned before about like the driving forces of that, it's kind of three things. So there's legislation, so there's a massive crackdown on it because you need to kind of ask people's permission to use their data, and I think most of the countries that have kind of enacted those legislations, the European Union through the GDPR. And then also, in the states, like the California Consumer Protection Act, which both of those legislations came out in like the middle of 2018. So that's kind of the driving force, and I think that was the start of that. And now countries are kind of catching up, and they're using that as the model. So if we're talking about Japan, they've got the APPI, the API, and they've made major amendments to that. But then I think what is also interesting as well is that consumers are starting to become more savvy around like what's happening on the internet, and that's another driving force. And then the third driving force is like the tech companies now coming to the table saying, okay, well, legislation's here, consumers want it, now we've got to kind of make our
brand around this.
Like, okay, they busted us, we got to do it now.
Exactly.
It's interesting, and I think like with the second point you made about consumers becoming more savvy, I think from an advertising perspective, I think one of the things that I think big tech, as well as sort of just people who work in the marketing community, have done a really bad job of is explaining the narrative as to why data collection is even used in our business, and like what's the whole motivation behind it. So just to give like a little short background, the whole idea of really digital advertising and the rise of digital advertising came from this ability of advertisers being able to essentially drive more efficient advertising spend, right? The idea was that, when you're doing traditional media like TV and radio, newspaper, etc., you're reaching a mass audience, of course, but you don't have that ability to really sort of customize or personalize that message to sort of push that consumer past that inertia of wanting to purchase something. And so what Google and many of the others who sort of follow suit provided was this means of sort of saying, look, people spend a lot of time on the internet. We have a lot of information about, how people consume media, what they do, how they spend their money. And so we can use this data to sort of help you as an advertiser really speak to your core target audience and really sort of drive whatever messages that you want to drive to them. And I think, maybe this is like me just being optimistic, but I think the original intention of data-driven advertising was essentially good. I think the idea was you're going to have advertising on the internet, probably unlike the experience on television, particularly in America where a TV show is interrupted every 2 minutes with a commercial that you probably don't care about at all. That I think the idea was, let's try to somehow seamlessly create an online experience where, yes, you have advertising, but it's not going to be so disruptive because it's going to be somewhat aligned to your interests and what you like and what makes sense for you. And I think that intention was good, and then obviously I think we've gone a little bit off the rails.
It's like once you got that taste, you're
well, yeah, it's just become so much easier because then you can just like click a button and you're like, oh, I want to find all the yoga moms in New York, and you're like, done, And so I think it's, I don't know if you agree, like if you guys think that it was sort of a good intention well-intentioned in the beginning, but I just felt like the original concept of sort of more relevant, personalized advertising, I don't necessarily think was a bad idea, but.
Well, yeah, I don't think it was, designed to be used for evil, right? I mean, that's just not how it works. But I think, marketers have been wanting to do that for years, and now, like, you've got a digital world where there's a digital kind of footprint of everyone and all their kind of behaviors and how they move and all that. It's essentially all tracked now. I think what I've seen is that, the technology has kind of moved so quickly that the legislation hasn't been able to kind of move with it.
Yeah.
And I think that doesn't just apply to like ad tech and what we're talking about here in advertising. You can see that with Bitcoin and blockchain technology and crypto and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that's the world we're in. Like the acceleration of technology is definitely moving super quickly. But I think to a certain extent before, like say GDPR and the CCPA and those kinds of things, which were arguably the strictest policies for consumer data protection and things like that, it was kind of like the Wild West. So there's a lot of data companies just taking data from users without consent, and just assuming that there is consent, or if you download an app, there's like 300 pages of the terms and conditions, right? And
which no one ever reads.
No one ever reads, but essentially what that's saying is like, if you download this app and you log in or whatever, we're going to take your geolocation data, we're going to take your your preferences and like demographic data and all that kind of thing, and it may be sold, and I think most people didn't know that this happened, but now like earlier this year, Apple's come out with that ad, and everyone, now the whole world knows about it. So it's definitely like a hot topic. So. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No, please continue. I was just going to say, like, kind of on that thought, like that's been happening for so long. So like, what is kind of the situation like right now? Like, what happens if you're using iOS 14 if you opt out or opt in? And so kind of like what is like from a consumer perspective, like what's being tracked? Like,
so I guess it depends on what part and role you play in the conversation. So let's talk about Apple specifically. So as Josh mentioned, like Apple makes hardware, right? I mean, they have a software that runs their hardware, but they're a hardware company. And so what they, attempted to do was sort of educate the consumer on the fact that when you download apps, particularly free ones, but generally all of them, those apps are always in the background collecting information, location information. That's how Uber knows where to deliver your food, et cetera, right? And so what Apple tried to sort of educate people on is to say, look, you don't have to agree to this, and also you should be aware that this is happening. And so what they've done in terms of their specific way to tackle this problem is they've basically made, so before, everything was, you were already opted in unless you chose to opt out, right? And so now they've kind of flipped that. So everyone is opted out unless you choose to opt in, which is a huge change, right? And so now, when you download, I'm sure everyone's experienced this on their phone recently, but now when you download an app, you're going to get a notification that asks if it's okay for this app to track your information. I think then it's up to you to sort of figure out if you want the app to track you or not. We can get into that a little later, which ones make sense and which ones don't. But that's from the Apple perspective. But then I guess, Josh, with like GDPR, you guys have dealt with that much longer at Crimtan. Like, I think it flows beyond just like the phones, right? It goes to like how you are on the internet and all of that.
Cool. So I think what we're going to talk about here is like cookies, and there's kind of two main types of cookies. There's a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie. A third-party cookie is a cookie that essentially tracks a user's behavior, or essentially tracks them across different websites, usually unbeknownst to the user. And then a first-party cookie is kind of like, I think the easiest way to kind of imagine this is Amazon, right? You log into Amazon, and then you leave the site, and then a week later you go back to Amazon, and it remembers your credit card, it remembers your name, remembers what you've purchased in the past. All of that data is stored on a first-party cookie. First-party cookie is very beneficial to a consumer, because imagine having to go into Amazon
every time.
It just doesn't make sense.
Remember any passwords.
So when we talk about cookies here, third-party cookies, they're the ones that are kind of considered to be somewhat malicious, because they're the ones that are tracking users without their knowledge to a certain extent. So GDPR and those kinds of legislations are really cracking down on the third-party cookies. And that's the same with Apple, and what we'll probably see in the future with Google as well, because they've made a recent announcement that they were planning to get rid of third-party cookies in January 2021. That now they've extended that to, I think, the mid of the mid of
2023.
2023, yeah, so June. So they're giving advertisers and platforms a bit more time to prepare for that.
Yeah, I think it's also like, I'm gonna check the numbers here, but I think there was, shortly after the iOS 14 update, I think like it was a very high number, like 80-something% of people opted out of Facebook tracking. So it's also this thing where I used to always kind of believe like, oh, but the consumer doesn't care about this, but it seems like they do care. But I think what's interesting also, to sort of say kind of where we are, I think what I think that needs to happen as well in terms of like the questions about privacy, what's going on in terms of like what is the data we're collecting, what is it being used for. I think the big thing is we have to, for the consumers, sort of explain, I think, what is the data being used for, but also the benefits of sharing the data, right? So as you just mentioned, Josh, like first-party cookies, not having to re-enter your information every single time, not having to re-put, especially if you use apps that do like delivery or subscription services, not having to re-enter that. So there is an element of data that you sort of make a good trade-off on in terms of just the convenience. I mean, Google Maps is another one. I don't think anyone would be like, I don't want Google to know where I am so they can help me find where I need to go. So I think there is, but are there other types of like trade-offs that you guys think that make sense for sort of tracking to be allowed? Like, because obviously there are some people who would argue, let's opt out of everything, but I think, if you had to make the case for data collection, like what would you tell like the average person?
Yeah, for me, I think there is definitely a kind of malicious side, as you were saying, Josh. Like, I think that one of the articles that you shared, Joshua, was like about location data and how it's been.
That was a crazy story.
Yeah, let's maybe talk about that right now, and then we can kind of go into. Sure. Let's talk about this kind of scary factor, and then we can go into maybe what are the benefits, and you can kind of weigh that out for yourself.
Yeah, no, this is insane. So there was a really, I think the original story was published on the Washington Post, and then a few other publications, Wired, etc., picked it up. Essentially, what happened was a few weeks ago, a Catholic bishop, or he was part of the Catholic bishop community, was fired because the information came to light that he had been using the gay networking app Grindr. And how they got this information actually was The Pillar, which is a Catholic publication, essentially bought this data from a data broker. And so just so people can understand what a data broker is, so obviously you have big tech companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon who collect data because you're using their platforms. But you also have companies which are like data brokerage companies that essentially collect and aggregate data and sell it to the highest bidder, basically. So I won't name any of them because I don't want to be sued, but you can Google them and look them up. And so what they do is they collect, either your loyalty program data, subscriptions you have. So some companies even collect, purchase data, what you buy online, etc. And so they aggregate that. A lot of them aggregate it into what many call personas or segments. And so if I'm an advertiser and let's say I want to target, women between the ages of 25 and 35 who live in New York, who eat organic food, who go to yoga, who like brunching with their friends, you can go to one of these data brokerage firms and get this kind of information, and they can create that for you. And so what was happening in this particular scenario is that for very nefarious purposes, these data brokerage firms were allowing news organizations to sort of purchase this data without any kind of regulation or oversight, tracked what this gentleman had done on his phone and where he had used his phone, and it ultimately cost him his job. So however you feel about the story or LGBT or whatever, I think the bigger story here, which is why it was picked up, was that, you know, there was no infraction made here. You know, the news organization that bought the data didn't violate any law. The data brokerage firm that sold the data to the news organization also didn't violate any law. And so this is kind of the big question of like, what happens when this becomes sort of table stakes and beyond advertisers, but let's say governments or your company that you work for decides, oh, I want to know if, you know, let's say if all my employees are actually working from home from 9 to 5 or whatever. So that's basically essentially that story, but you should definitely look it up because it's quite a crazy story.
Yeah, and so I think on that side of things where it is so finite, where it can be like on a per person basis, and used in a way that is sort of nefarious or really targeted at a specific outcome that isn't really related to benefiting the users or anything along those lines. I think that can be pretty black, like versus black, white, gray. Like it's not really that gray. I think that really falls on the side that's probably not the best use case. On the other side, though, for me, I kind of have a personal story, and this actually connects to an article that Josh, you shared, which was about. Actually, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, which sorry.
The target one.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, so you know that's it kind of relates to what you know Joshua was saying before, but. And you know, this is kind of a famous story, and it's about 10 years old. This kind of thing that happened, but essentially Target, so that the department store, I think it was in 2012, they kind of found out that a teenage girl was pregnant before even her parents did, and I think. The way that came about is from using data collected on those particular that particular person. So the story goes, this teenage girl, she bought a particular product, so it was like lotions and like vitamins and like a blue rug and 25 other things. And what they did at Target is like they deep dived into that data, did a few bits of analytics on it, pulled out a percentage which turned out to be about 87% that this person is pregnant and they're going to have birth in like within a week of they knew when she was actually going to have the baby within a week. And what Target does is they take that data and make custom catalogs and things like that they would send either in the mail or like digitally through email and things like that through EDMs. And obviously the parents of the teenage daughter, they started to see all this, diapers and things like
pregnancy ads.
Pregnancy ads and things like that, and with the teenage girl's name on it, right? So they're like, so the dad gets super pissed off. He goes, marches down to Target and is like, why is my daughter getting all this? And kind of, fit of rage. Anyway, a week later, the father calls Target back and says, I'm sorry, actually my daughter is pregnant, and thank you for sending the coupons and that kind of thing. So
that's craziness.
And there was no laws broken. I think Target themselves, like massive pool of data that they can pull those kinds of things in. And
that's first party data. Actually, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about before.
First party data. So it's all consented data. So that particular girl would have signed up to some kind of Target loyalty card or credit card or whatever it may be, which would have had that fine print in it to say, hey, we use your your data and store it and then use it for advertising. So
it's interesting. It's like, so there was a PwC report that was done talking about sort of consumer data. And what I thought was really interesting is it says 76% of consumers recognize that sharing data with companies is a necessary evil, but also recommend the benefits of doing so. But 67% said they feel like they have little to no control over how their data is used, and 60% said they expect companies to do business, the companies that they do business with, they're going to take data into consideration. And so it seems like also just like the idea of I think telling people what kind of data you're collecting and then what you intend to do with it, I think is kind of the thing that I think everyone's asking pretty much. But I don't know if you...
Yeah, and so what I wanted to talk about around this was kind of my experience. And in the Target story, what I thought was really interesting was it wasn't that the family themselves were like, oh, you violated our human right by using our data to send us these coupons. It was actually more of the reaction of the general public where they kind of found out, oh my God, like Target can do this.
Yeah.
And again, this was 10 years ago. And I remember at the time when I found that out, this is really just my personal experience. I don't know if this translates, but I wasn't so taken aback. And it kind of was like a moment where I realized like, that almost has a benefit. Like for me personally, like I'd be able to find things that maybe I wouldn't have known that I needed. And I thought like it was a moment where I was like, well, technology is kind of beautiful actually. Like it's able to like predict what I'm gonna need before maybe I even fully realize it or before like, yeah. And recently, a more recent story that is connected to this is when I was moving to Japan. I was living in LA before, and I had my car that I would drive everywhere because in LA you have to drive everywhere. But I was moving to Japan, and I remember scrolling through Instagram. Instagram has like the best targeted ads, I think.
They're the best.
I've been on the purchase page so many times and just like, how did I get here? Like magnetic goo, like so many weird things that I'm like, I didn't even know I wanted this. But one of the things that I saw was like a gym bag. And I remember being like, why would I ever need this? Like I'm living in LA, like I have my car. There's like, I can just keep all my stuff in my car. And then I kind of realized like later, like, oh my God, like I'm moving to Japan. Like I'm not gonna have a car in like 2 months or whatever, so I am actually gonna, and you can't find those ads that you saw on Instagram, so I had to scroll for like days. I never found it, but I ended up buying a gym bag on Amazon, and that was a moment where I was like, wow, like advertising, again, like this could be a little bit biased. I was working in marketing at the time, but I wasn't in ad tech or involved in advertising really at all. And so for me, like having that experience like kind of showed me like, oh, like there are times where like I won't even fully recognize that I need a product, or like music discovery is another thing, right? You don't like, there's so much music, the only way you're gonna find it is if there's these algorithms that are predicting potentially what you would like. Or through recommendations, I guess. But yeah, and so I found that was like a really big benefit for me personally. And even now, because of that experience, when I log on to like Medium or the New York Times or whatever it is, and I get that little pop-up that's like, hey, do you want to accept these cookies? I do actually take the time to kind of look and like, okay, like if it's advertising, I'm kind of okay with that. Location data is kind of weird sometimes, and you're like, why does the New York Times need to know where I am? I don't know if they track that. That's just anecdote. But yeah, and so for me, I had this really positive experience with it. And I think that at a certain level, it's almost more comfortable, and it creates like a better ad experience if I'm able to share more data. But then on the flip side, I think that if it is being used for these kind of really targeted sort of nefarious purposes, I think that limiting that is obviously a benefit. Like I don't see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you touch on like two points. I think one is because you mentioned Instagram and that experience. So I think one of the things we have to do as like from a marketing perspective, and I'll let Josh talk about this a bit as well, because I think Crimtan's doing a lot of this. So one of the things is the sort of creative experience that happens as a result of the data. So typically, I think when this all started out again, I think you had advertisers who sort of really bought into the concept of this like seamless online experience that created, to your point example, showing me things I didn't know I needed, or really being incredibly aligned with what I knew I needed. And I think from an advertising perspective, I think we just got a little lazy. I think we were able to sort of push these data segments out. People stopped caring so much about the creative, people stopped caring so much about the message, etc. And it was just like, oh, let's attach this to this data set. There's affinity here, let's just do it. And so I think that this is why I find people are getting so annoyed with the online experience. YouTube, unfortunately, is one that I think is a terrible sort of ad experience, where it is linked to you because of data, but it's not. The creative, the experience itself is still very jarring based on what you're doing. So I think creative and how you sort of match creative and the data together, I think is going to be an important key thing, and I think it's one of the things that helps the experience be better. The other part of it is, I think it's going to be up to, I think, publishers, when we're talking about websites, so you mentioned the New York Times, it's going to be up to publishers to sort of really understand and really understand sort of where the consumer is in terms of their knowledge, and try to explain to them that the reason that you enjoy the New York Times for free is because of advertising. We have to find a way to pay our writers. We have to find a way to produce this content that you so enjoy. YouTube is free. Facebook is free. Google search. All of these things that we use and utilize to sort of make our lives easier and better. There is a trade-off to that. I just think maybe a lot of the companies have done a really bad job at sort of explaining that, and then also making sure that that experience, if you're going to have to deal with advertising on the New York Times website, that advertising is not jarring, creepy, irrelevant, etc. And I know, at Crimtan, you guys are doing a lot of stuff around this, sort of trying to follow the regulatory things that are in place, but also trying to sort of create really good advertising experiences for your clients, I think, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, just kind of touching on one of the points you mentioned there before, it's like, that's the trade-off, right? Like, the internet is free. It's the free model of the internet is driven by advertising. So
free is like a misnomer almost, right? It's like ad-supported is like the real term that exactly. Should be used.
And exactly, so that's what's driving the free, internet. It's advertising spend and that kind of thing. And I don't know if the consumers actually understand that. And so it's kind of if there are people listening to this who kind of hear the scary stories like about the Catholic bishop or the target teenager example, it's like they might be scared. Like, I'm not getting my data to anybody. Screw that kind of thing. But the trade-off is like, well, would you pay for these kind of things that you like to consume, like the New York Times or New York Post or Washington Post or whatever it may be, or even like Facebook, Instagram, Gmail, Google Maps? They're all free because it's driven by advertising spend. So I mean, like I found this article. It was from Vox, and those are the guys that make those kind of short documentaries, and they kind of I think take this with a grain of salt because there's no kind of deep analytics around this, but they kind of looked at the advertising spend just in the US in say 2018, and it was about $100 billion. And what they did was they divided that by the online population in the States. It's like 250 million or whatever it is. And they worked out that if we are going to move to like an ad-free world, what would that actually look like for a consumer? And they worked it out to be around $35 per month per user to kind of pay for those services. So if you think about it, like, oh, I use Google Maps, okay, that's $10. I use Facebook, that's $15. Actually now I want to like use Instagram, that's another $20. And like you can imagine that starts to go up.
On top of paying for the internet service itself.
And the subscriptions that you already have. So I pay for YouTube, I actually pay for Netflix, all the like classic ones, but
that's exactly right. And I think your example about YouTube is like they have was it YouTube Red, I think it is.
It's premium. It's called premium. It's been rebranded.
YouTube Premium.
I'm a premium subscriber.
How dare you, by the way, but anyway.
And that's the thing. It's like, well, I don't want to see ads, and so you pay whatever. Like, what is it, Bryan? Like, you pay. It's
$12.99 a month.
That's
in the States on iOS. I heard if you go direct through Google, I was talking to Victor actually about this recently, and Victor was saying that if you go direct through Google, it's actually cheaper. But I subscribed when I was using an iPhone. Now I'm on Android.
I see. Yeah.
So I think that's definitely the trade-off. Like, if you want an ad-free environment, you do have platforms where you can pay for it. But if you're like, no, actually, I don't want to pay for it, maybe younger consumers, then like the trade-off is like, okay, well, your data may be used. But I think what we've kind of tried to work out here is like pre-2018, so pre-legislation like GDPR and those kinds of things. The Wild West thing was just, people's data was getting picked up and whatever. And now what's happening is like, advertisers in those countries, and it's happening now in Japan and everywhere really, is like they're asking for explicit consent now, and that's what is required by these laws is that you need to ask explicit consent to use a particular user's data. So that's like the pop-up that you see. Like you go to Nike.com or whatever, the pop-up comes up, hey, can I use your data for this, and this, and like if you're like, yeah, you can use my data for personal advertising, but I don't want you to take my geo data. Then you like the consumer now has that choice. And I think countries are moving towards that now with these new kind of legislation. So I think we're moving in the right direction because it's giving that consumer choice now, rather than just taking the data that in the past has been implicit consent, so just assumed consent. Hey, it's okay because you're using my website, and if you click in the fine print privacy policy, it's written in there. But now it's definitely changing. So but just. I think your question before, Josh, was talking about like relevant advertising. And I think this is kind of the trade-off now as well. It's like, do you want to? And Bryan, you mentioned before, like Instagram, all those kinds of things. They're showing you products that you're kind of interested in. Like, do you want an Instagram that's showing you like women's lingerie?
Because you're gonna see something.
Something, right? Like it's still gonna happen. But do you want it to be relevant, or do you want it to be, I guess, like non-relevant?
Kind of continuing on that, I wanted to touch on a little bit, just like the solutions available now for kind of optimizing your ad experience. There are solutions like Brave Browser, which is something we were talking about before, which is like an ad-free experience unless you opt in. But another thing that I think maybe most people don't know about, but exists and has existed for 10 plus years probably, is AdChoice, which is like when you see an ad, there's like a little logo in the corner usually.
That. I'm just kidding. No, sorry.
But I mean, you can go in and kind of select like, like even through Google, you can say like, you can see what your data profile is and like select like, okay, I am interested in camping. I am interested in basketball, like whatever it is, like you can say specifically the kinds of ads that you want to see, which I think helps kind of at least make people more comfortable with the idea, like they feel a little bit more in control of what is happening. I know for me that made a huge difference. And I'm not sure in Instagram and Facebook.
YouTube, so YouTube will ask you, why am I seeing this ad? So you can sort of understand why they're serving it to you.
Twitter as well, I know.
With Facebook, you can also, when you see an ad, say that you want to stop seeing this ad. You can also request not see the ad anymore. I think you can even maybe say that you already have the product, even perhaps. But and the interesting thing is when people sort of opt out of those things, I think on Facebook you're like penalized for that. Like if someone, like the more people sort of opt out of seeing your ads, it sort of penalizes you because the thing about Facebook, YouTube, I mean, ideally Instagram, probably Instagram more than anyone else because it's so visual. They want a great ad experience for the consumer. Like they want it to be relevant. They also don't want it to be jarring and whatnot. But so there's a number of things you can do there. I think with GDPR, even, correct me if I'm wrong, you have the opportunity to. One of the rules is that you can agree to have all of your data erased. I think once you can do it in a year. Like, so this, what is it like? I think it's like the request to be forgotten or something. I think within the GDPR regulation I think you can only do it once a year, once every 2 years, but you can like request to just sort of have your data completely sort of wiped out. But I mean, there are things you can definitely do. Whether you should do them or not, I think is really dependent on, I guess probably largely how much convenience you want in your life. I mean, you make the point about Nike geo data. So for example, it was, I was thinking like Nike geo data. So if you want to buy something and pick it up in store, they need your geo data. They need to know where you are to make sure that's available. Imagine if they didn't have your geo data, you go to your nearest Nike store, shoes not there in your size. You'd be very upset. So I think it's like, those sorts of trade-offs of like how much people are willing to also just have a little less convenience. Again, I think that it definitely should be regulated. I think we should have larger conversations about what's being collected, et cetera, really sort of explaining, I think, the function of each one. This is why we use geodata. It's not to just sort of track where you are. It also helps Google Maps get better. It also makes sure that, you know, where we tell you a restaurant is, there's one when you get there, et cetera. But yeah, and so I wanted to ask you, Josh, like, how are you guys at Crimtan kind of delivering like effective advertising and like, you know, getting your clients who are advertisers like the return on ad spend and all of that, while still trying to obviously follow the regulations of all of the policies?
Yeah, for sure. I think so for us, like, you know, like I kind of mentioned at the beginning that, you know, Crimtan, we're a UK founded company, right? So we had to adjust our platform and invest in our platform to become, you know, GDPR compliant. And so what we developed was something called Active ID, which is a cookieless kind of solution. But at the core of that solution, even though it is cookieless, it keeps kind of user privacy at the forefront. So it's a consumer first product. And what that actually means is like, it's all about consented advertising. So consent, so essentially asking a user, hey, can we use your data? And if that's okay, then we will use that data and those signals to do relevant advertising. So, you know, you kind of mentioned it before, Joshua, around, you know, there's kind of 6 things that GDPR kind of brings into play. And you know, the right to be forgotten. So the consumer has the right to say, I don't want to be involved in this kind of advertising space. So they can be forgotten. They got the right to port, which means that if they live in, say, Germany and then they move to the States, they can essentially pick up their data and take it to the States and then implement that there, and then, you know, use their online preferences in that way. Right to rectify the data. So let's say, you know, you're getting like women's lingerie ads, you know, lingerie ads or whatever, something that's not relevant to you, you can go in there and like fix it and say, hey, I'm a male and, you know, I'm not interested in this thing. Maybe you are, but, you know, whatever. But, you know, those
I want
kinds
more
of
these.
So I jack that up, like turn that dial right up. And, you know, all of those kinds of things. So for us, it's, you know, we've got this platform now where it sits on, you know, client site, and then it plugs into what they call a CMP, a consent management platform, which is those pop-ups that I mentioned before. Nice. And so if the user's like, you know, I don't want Crimtan to use my data for this, then we essentially don't, you know, absorb that data. And, you know, what we're seeing is like I think when we're looking at Apple and iOS and those kinds of things, when you talked about the opt-out rate, like 80% or whatever it was, I think one thing that I kind of see happening is that the way that the way that Apple has kind of phrased,
yeah,
like,
sure.
Hey, do you want to be tracked? You know, exclamation mark, question mark, like, you know, this is kind of
it's fear mongering,
exactly. But then if you go to Nike.com or like, you know, something else, it's kind of like, hey, do you want to allow your data to be used for relevant advertising, which is kind of a nicer way than saying, do you want to be tracked? You know?
Yeah. I think about that so much. I think that the biggest issue around this, from my perspective, like, I'm a marketer first, and so of course I want my marketing to be effective, but our ethos here at Wahl+Case is very like customer focused. Like, we're really trying to provide value, which is this podcast, all this kind of stuff. And so I also feel like I'm pretty close to consumer side. And I think that the biggest issue around this for me is that it's kind of like the branding, like you were saying, where it's like if you ask someone, would you like a custom tailored experience, like world? Like, do you want to go to Nike and know that they have your shoes? Do you want to go to Target and they're giving you the coupons that you're actually going to use? Yeah. And it's like, the easy answer there is obviously like, yes, like I want my life to be as convenient and tailored to my specific needs as possible. But then if you ask someone like, do you want to be tracked? Do you want everyone to know what you're doing at all times? It's like, no, I don't want that. Yeah. And I think that when people are limiting things like the third-party cookie, which is actually kind of anonymous in a very like loose term too, and I think some of these things that are being proposed as solutions, especially Google, I know I've been like talking them up kind of, but this is like kind of the reverse side is where like Chrome is first party, but it tracks everything you're doing anyway. And so it's going to be, you're going to get tracked regardless of whether or not they get rid of these third-party cookies. And so from my perspective, it just feels like I would rather have that experience that's really seamless and smooth, and I'm getting things that I want, and I'm able to go into these stores and know that I'm really making the right choice and the most informed choice for me. And at the same time, I think that where it needs to be limited are the things like that example of like the story of the bishop who gets caught on Grindr, because that is like, that's a clear violation of that person's like essential privacy rights. But I think that having a nice seamless experience in store is like completely different. And so I think that that's where the legislation really needs to kind of happen and hammer down on. And I think Apple has been really controlling the conversation in the way that benefits them. And I think that we can do another follow-up episode that's going into like, from a marketer's perspective, why these big businesses are actually doing this.
I mean, I completely agree. I would say that I think there is a difference also between, you know, data that you consent to because you sign up for a loyalty program, because you go to a website, you know, give them your email address, there's a password, etc. I think where a lot of the concern in terms of legislation is coming from is, I think partially that, which is companies just being very upfront, but I think it's also like the selling of data and these kind of data brokerage firms that their only sort of reason of existence is aggregating, collecting big data, and then selling it to the highest bidder. And so I would say, as we kind of, I think, close this out, like, you know, as a consumer, so what should you do? Like, opt out of everything, opt into everything. I think what you have to do is sort of look at your day-to-day and sort of look at how much of apps or internet you're consuming and what you're consuming that for and how convenient that makes your life. And then you sort of decide for yourself, you know, like I said, if you eat Uber Eats a lot, let them track you. I mean, it's going to be more convenient in that way. But a lot of these other apps that you have on your phone, sort of like where you just want, I don't know, like news apps or game apps or whatever, I think you just sort of think about the utility of those sorts of things in your life. And is that, I would ask myself, like, is my experience with this app or with this website going to be made better if they know more about me? If the answer is yes, then I think you should consider giving the data. If it's like, no, I just want the same generic experience that everyone else has, they don't need to know that I'm in, you know, Phoenix instead of Los Angeles, etc. So I think that's I would say the big question. I don't know if you guys would agree, but just like, when you do it, will my life be made better or more convenient by sharing data? Am I okay with that? And then sort of obviously read. I don't really read the fine print, and I'm not going to tell anybody else to either, because it's really long and really complicated. But yeah, I think that would be the big thing I would sort of give as a piece of advice.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, Joshua. I think, you know, just kind of in addition to that, you know, I think people need to understand that, like, there are laws in place where you can't actually take, like, legally people's names and email addresses and those kinds of things. You know, personal identifiable information is something that can't be used. Right. And so and I think you touched on this before, Bryan, that it is anonymous. So if you do see that thing that pops up saying, you know, can we use your data? Or if you do download that free app, like, don't think that within the app they're going to take all of your you know, personal identifiable information, sell that to you know, someone in, I don't know, like Russia or whatever, and they're going to hack you or something like that, because that's not the reality of the situation. So I think that's also, you know, people should have peace of mind when they're on the internet, but they also, you know, the way things are moving, like, advertisers and brands are now coming to the table giving you know, consumers the choice now whether they want to have that experience with that brand. There is laws in place that are becoming stricter, and, you know, there are kind of those models now where you can pay for an ad-free world if you want that through, you know, things like Spotify and YouTube. So I think it's definitely moving in the right direction, and people should have peace of mind when browsing on, you know, the net.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, I think now we're finally in an era that we can that consumers can actually be mindful of how their data is used. And so I think a lot of that responsibility did fall on tech companies, but they, as Josh was saying, like, they are making ground to like put that responsibility in the hands of the consumer. And so I would just say, like, for me personally, I feel like it's finally gotten to a point where I feel like I have more control over what's being put out there. And I just feel like I can be more mindful about how my own data is being used. And so I do appreciate that. And I think that moving forward, it's only going to get better. And so I just recommend that everybody is kind of just, aware and maybe not read the fine print, but like read those prompts that you get now, because they're pretty straightforward, they're pretty streamlined. And you can really be, selective and choose how to optimize your own experience.
Well, I think that's good for part 1. We've got a part 2 coming up for
marketers and advertisers.
So we're going to get really inside baseball.
Yeah.
Talk about cookies and data clean rooms and all of this other stuff that has been really sort of making, I think, all of us advertisers crazy, and then like Google just keeps extending it, so it's like the thing we're waiting on and it just keeps coming. But yeah, great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Josh.
Thanks, Josh, for joining. Josh will be back in the part 2 as well. So,
looking forward to it.
We'll get into specifically also what Crimtan is doing, and that'll be really awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.